So I don't know if you've been checking out my account on TikTok. I post little snippets mostly of journalists and just the sections that I think highlighting their work and then sort of leaving a link to the larger, to the fuller content. But anyway, I posted something by Mike Preisner from Eyes Left podcast. He's also the producer, one of the producers on the Empire Files with Abby Martin, his partner. And they and Mike did this he's restarted Eyes Left podcast, so check it out. And I saw this podcast that he did on Ron DeSantis, who could be the next U.S. president. And he was talking about how Ron DeSantis is... I might even post this at the end of this video. He was talking about how Ron DeSantis was overseeing torture. It appears he was overseeing torture in Guantanamo Bay prison and also in Iraq. And he was actually meant to be there in a lawyer capacity he was supposed to protect human rights, which is kind of, what can one expect in a place that shouldn't even exist. But he was there supposedly to protect human rights, and what he was really doing, part of it was gathering information from prisoners, finding out their weaknesses, and then sort of playing on those weaknesses, sort of like a psychological torture and physical torture kind of thing. He was also involved in Iraq as well, and I think he was possibly doing the same sorts of things in relation to prisoners and torture. So, and apparently he was laughing as these prisoners were being force-fed. One of the prisoners who was actually talking in this episode by Mike had thrown up in his face. So he's a real charming character, this Ron DeSantis, enjoying torture, a sadist, and we also know that he's sort of anti-trans. He's bringing in all sorts of awful laws against trans people, and eventually we'll be going back decades if he gets into office. Anyway, but it's looking like that because Trump seems to have his hands full with the U.S. national security state, making sure that he doesn't get into office. They obviously think that Ron DeSantis is going to do their bidding more so than Donald Trump. Anyway, what I was going to point out in this episode by Mike Preisner is that there was this during Ron DeSantis' time there, from what I understand, there were 3 prisoners in Gitmo in Guantanamo Bay who were found hanging in their cells, dead, and their arms were bound and their feet. So obviously it wasn't a suicide, and it was obviously probably more than likely the guards of the Guantanamo Bay, and these were 3 of the people who were on a hunger strike, who they tried to get through force feeding, etc., to stop. They used to force feed them 5 times a day, which is this stuff called Ensure, which I remember as a nurse we used to feed unconscious patients through a nasogastric tube. Obviously they can't eat, but with these hunger strikers, they used to give them 5 cans or something a day and intentionally make them feel sick and throw up. So it was not only was it a form of torture putting down these tubes, which is a very uncomfortable thing. I put them down. I put them down people who are conscious because of one reason or another, who are not unconscious anyway. They're semi-conscious, and it invokes, you have to do it carefully, it invokes a gag reflex because you're putting it down their nostril, through their throat and into their stomach. These are people that can't eat, and you want to make sure they have adequate nutrition. That's one way of providing nutrition. There are other ways, but that's one. Anyway, so they were doing that and using very thick nasogastric tubes, which is another way of causing discomfort. So anyway, these I'm going off the track there, but these prisoners that they found in their cells, who'd obviously been murdered. I mean, do you remember hearing about that at the time? I don't remember anything about this, and it should have been everywhere. But and of course you can't expect the corporate media; they're just propaganda arms of the U.S. national security state. But that information should have been everywhere, that these prisoners were found hanging in their cells. But on top of that, which is worse and should have been everywhere, and if any other country had done this to these prisoners, you would never hear the end of it. If like China had done it, if Russia had done it, if Iran had done it, whatever, you'd never hear the end of it. But they sent back these prisoners to, I think it was Iraq, and they, with all their internal organs missing, and also some, they cut out something in their neck. If that isn't so disgusting, like, firstly, whole Guantanamo Bay shouldn't have existed, the prison. And then to force feed people, which is torture, other things too, just the no trial, the whole thing, disgusting. And then to end up killing them because they were part of this sort of protest against being in this prison, this awful prison, year after year after year. And then after killing them, and obviously torturing them, because that's why they removed their organs and cut out something in part of their neck. To then send those mutilated bodies of those people back to Iraq. I mean, how would you feel if you were their family and friends? I mean, it's so disgusting. Like, I'd never heard of that. I don't know if anybody else has heard of that. If you've heard of that, please let me know. But I had never heard of that particular instance, and I know there was plenty of problems, plenty of awful stuff going on there, but that is particularly grotesque and sadistic and just appalling. I mean, abuses of the highest order. Recently, I think I posted a video on YouTube about Ben Norton talking to the French ambassador, the ex-French ambassador for the US, and how he was saying that the US just ignores international order, international rules. They go on a rules-based order, but basically they make the rules and everybody else does what they say. That's how it goes. And the French ambassador was highly critical of the US. This is a high-profile French ambassador to the US. And he was very, very critical of how the US just does what it wants, basically. And so please check that out by Ben Norton from Multipolar Vista. I've posted 10 minutes. That was something that I posted on TikTok. And this is another thing about TikTok. I'm not a fan of TikTok, but I am noticing how if you post something, it gets so much more traction than on YouTube, which shows that it has a little bit of loosened algorithms when it comes to anti-imperialist content. And that's good. So, I mean, like, for example, I posted that 10-minute video by Ben Norton about the French ambassador and his critique of the US, and basically, and it got sort of, I don't know, so far it's gotten about 7,500 views. And it'll probably get a lot more because it seems like it just goes on. It's not like it gets a limited exposure, and and there are a couple of 2 or 3 other videos. One has got 48,000. That was a 5-minute clip of Abby Martin. And then there was this very short clip of Professor Jeffrey Sachs, saying that critiquing the US imperialism, and that got 100,000 views. So there is benefits to these awful social media platforms. Maybe it's because it's mostly owned by China that they allow anti-imperialist content. I'm not sure what it is, and yet it's really not very good with anything about Julian Assange. So I don't know what's going on with TikTok, but I'm glad that they allow this sort of content to be shown a little bit more than way more than YouTube. So anyway, if you want to join TikTok anyhow and check out check out some of the videos, they're just excerpts really of bits and pieces of journalists, and also the occasional one of me on there. You only can put 10 minutes duration of content. So, but anyhow, I find this whole thing with these 3 prisoners that happened back in 2006 to be just unbelievably outrageous. And I know that's just one of like thousands and thousands of things that the US has done, international human rights abuses and war crimes, etc. But I mean, it just goes to show, they do whatever the hell they want. And if any other country did that, you would never hear the end of it. If any other country sent, obviously murdered those prisoners in their cells, they shouldn't have even been in that awful prison. Murdered them in their cells. We don't even know who they really are or what they did or didn't do, because there were no trials. And then they sent them back to their country. And then, imagine if that had been done to US prisoners, and sent them back to their country with their organs missing, and then, neck missing, part of their neck missing, obviously hiding torture. Imagine. You would never hear the end of it if it was the US. And that is the hypocrisy, and shows the absolute monster U.S. empire, the sadistic empire that needs to end, that just goes on and on unabated. And it is coming to an end, and I think the folks in there know it, and that's why they're making some desperate moves, wanting to, sort of threatening nuclear war and all this kind of stuff, because they know they're losing their hegemony. And that includes the US dollar is losing its hegemony as well. And, this multipolar world is emerging, and they know it, and that is why they're so desperate and, possibly might try and end everything rather than allow their full spectrum dominance to be threatened. So anyway, please check out that podcast by Eyes Left by Mike Preisner, from the producer of the Empire Files. He's restarted it and he's put it on the Empire Files platform, so you can actually watch the video. It's just really a podcast, but they put it on Empire Files on YouTube. So just go to @Empire Files on YouTube and check out this most recent thing of Mike Preisner about Ron DeSantis. It's something worth knowing about him, because he's a scary individual, and he's also, a lot of people don't know about his military past and how he's engaged in war crimes. That's something that he keeps to himself, probably because he's afraid of prosecution, but that's something that he's keeping secret. A lot of what he did over in Iraq and in Gitmo and all of that.
2006, when DeSantis was there, was the height of the Bush torture program at Gitmo. Could Ron DeSantis, the far-right officer who just 2 years prior was teaching high schoolers to sympathize with the slaveocracy and today speaks at events for anti-Muslim hate groups, could someone like him actually have been some kind of protector of detainee human rights, and at a time when illegal torture was actually the policy at the torture camp? Until now, nothing was really known about what DeSantis did for the 10 months he was at the island prison, other than those statements from former colleagues. I knew there had to be more to the story, so on November 17th, I called Mansour Adaifi, known to DeSantis as Detainee 441. Mansour, sold to the U.S. by Afghan warlords after 9/11, was a totally innocent teenager, held at Guantanamo Bay from 2002 until 2016, so he has a robust knowledge of life and torture at Gitmo. He told me that not only was DeSantis there for what he called the worst year of his entire imprisonment, but DeSantis was a notorious figure who didn't just know about, but observed and participated in illegal acts of torture, and in fact seemed to take great pleasure in their suffering. He reveals that the job of DeSantis was not to ensure human rights were respected, but to ensure that they were violated to the worst degree. Just a warning, the following interview contains some graphic descriptions of torture.
The second day, I swear by my God, Mike, they brought, piles of Ensure, and they start force-feeding us over and over again.
For those who don't know, Ensure is a thick, milky nutritional shake mainly marketed on daytime television to elderly people. I've had them and they are very hard to drink.
Yes, and Ron DeSantis was there watching us. We were crying, screaming. We were tied to the feeding chair, and that guy, he was watching that, he was laughing basically. When they used to feed us, because our stomach cannot hold this amount of Ensure. They used to pour Ensure one can after another. So when he approached me, I said, this is the way we are treated. He said, you should start to eat. I threw up in his face, literally on his face.
Ron DeSantis.
And his face, yeah.
Mansour vomiting on DeSantis' face in a desperate cry for help was well-deserved. The JAG lawyer would have been well aware at the time that this was indeed a violation of international law, in particular, Common Article 3, which we reviewed earlier. There's no question that it was torture, and the UN Human Rights Commission further clarified that it regarded the force feeding at Guantanamo Bay as a form of torture. The World Medical Association also specifically prohibited force feeding in its Declaration of Tokyo in 1975.
They used to restrain us in the feeding chair, which like 8 points. They tied our heads, our shoulder, our wrist, our thighs, and our legs. And they came, and they would really thick tube, they call it French 17 or something, through our nose. And they keep doing this over and over again, and they put some kind laxative in the feeding liquid, with we shit in ourselves all the time. Then we would be moved to solitary confinement, really cold cells. If we throw up, and we used to get it 5 times a day. It wasn't feeding, it was torture. So we couldn't handle it for 5 days. We couldn't, because 5 times a day, you can't. You cannot possibly handle it, because They just kept pouring the insurance. And in 1 week, they break all the hunger strikers. In 1 week, totally. It was a mission. And he was there. All of them was watching, the colonel, officers, doctors, nurses. And not just that, they used to also beat us. And if we scream or pain, bleeding came out on our nose and mouth, they would like, eat. The only word they told you, eat, eat, eat. We were beating all day long, all day. There's a team. Whatever you do, they just beat you. Pepper spray, beating, sleep deprivation, that continued for 3 months. And he was there because at the beginning, he told us that he was there to ensure we are treated humanely. And if we have concern or issues, he will take it. But he's one of the people who actually survived the torture, the abuse, the beating all the time at Guantanamo.
So Ron DeSantis, he wasn't just there as like a lawyer that you could go to. He was actually supervising torture, beatings, and he was supervising these force feedings of you and others. In addition to all the brutal torture we know was happening on DeSantis's watch, he was also there for a very disturbing incident. On June 9th, 2006, 3 detainees, all leaders in the hunger strike, were found dead in their respective cells. Each was found hanging by the neck, hands and feet bound, with a piece of cloth shoved down their throat. Their bodies were sent home with all their organs and parts of the neck removed so that no autopsies could be performed. Officials ruled the deaths suicides. But Staff Sergeant Joseph Hickman, a prison guard who was on duty at the time, insists the men were actually tortured to death in a book he published in 2015. We can only wonder how much DeSantis knew about this incident. We know that DeSantis' tour in Guantanamo was one where he worked to not only cover up violations of international law, but was a gleeful participant in the war crimes. His joy in the face of one of the most grotesque and dehumanizing scenarios I've ever heard of, I think, is something that should haunt him for the rest of his political career. But his military story is not over. DeSantis must have impressed his superiors at the torture camp and proven he was just the kind of ethically compromised lawyer they needed, because he went straight from one big assignment to another. The same year DeSantis left Cuba, he was sent to Iraq. Like with Guantanamo, DeSantis makes passing reference to this in some speeches and campaign ads, but with the same murkiness about what he actually did. It is the time of the 2007 Baghdad airstrike revealed in the Collateral Murder video. Death, of course, was not just rained down from the sky, but infantrymen on the ground in that same video recall that they were told their mission was to, quote, out-terrorize the terrorists through a variety of illegal tactics, including indiscriminate gunfire in all directions in civilian areas in response to IED attacks. But DeSantis wasn't with a regular conventional unit. He was assigned to the Special Operations Task Force, which commanded both Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces, who are notorious for extralegal acts of unconventional warfare at all times, let alone during the deadliest year of the Iraq War. Now, we've already explored what Ron's oversight could mean for treatment of detainees, interrogations in the field by SEALs and Special Forces. I mean, you can just use your imagination there. Was his job in both places really to ensure the rule of law and the human rights of detainees, or was that just the official language, but in practice, his job was actually to cover up war crimes? In other words, was he there to do the same thing he did at Gitmo? As far as I can tell, he is still an officer in the Navy Reserves. After returning from Iraq in 2008, his next JAG assignment was being assigned to the Department of Justice in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida. He completed his active duty contract in 2010 and the same year transferred to the Navy Reserves. And as of this year, 2022, he's still in the Navy Reserves. So we may have another Tulsi Gabbard on our hands, a right-wing culture warrior rising through the political ranks while simultaneously rising through the military ranks, indicative of the type of people who crave power with some unnerving implications about politicians who exist in both the civilian and military worlds. We know from history, deep ties to the military establishment make any far-right demagogue all the more dangerous. Ron DeSantis has already become an ideological leader on the right for hyping up culture war issues like critical race theory and legislating heavily against abortion, LGBTQ rights, and COVID restrictions as governor. Whatever happens with the 2024 election, DeSantis is here to stay as a national political figure for a while. Now that we know, and there are so many witnesses to attest to this, that he covered up and participated in illegal torture, not as an interrogator, but as an attorney who was duty-bound to uphold human rights law. His closest collaborator in the so-called anti-woke Messiah rebrand, which he began in 2020, is Christopher Rufo. Rufo is from the Heritage Foundation, a neoconservative think tank, which not only helped Bush 1 and Bush 2 mastermind their respective Iraq wars, but was a leading defender of Bush's torture program at the time DeSantis was watching people be gruesomely force-fed. And while we don't know exactly what he did in Iraq, there are probably some witnesses out there who do, who are hopefully found soon as well. If he does want to be president, isn't it relevant that he covered up and participated in war crimes? And shouldn't those disturbing details about his character, which you heard about today, matter when it's someone who already controls an entire state and may one day control the entire country? The Ronald has so far tried to keep this military past in the shadows with just enough hazy reference to be able to check that coveted box of being a veteran with overseas experience. Now that we have shed some light into his closet, let's hope the light stays on. Thank you for listening to Eyes Left. To support the show, join us at patreon.com/eyesleft or patreon.com/Empire Files. This project is sponsored by Empire Files, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, so your donations are all tax deductible. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EyesLeftPod. Always feel free to contact us there or at eyesleftpod@gmail.com, especially if you are in the military and in need of some solidarity, some help, or just want to be heard.
Eyes Left.
Anyway, thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Fancy Signals for Vega. I hope you're well. Maybe at some point soon, before this holiday season, we might do a live stream and just catch up with people. And do join my TikTok if you wish. And so anyway, have a great day. Till next time. Bye for now.